We're talking about budgets, right? Yeah. How do you feel already?
Good.
You're okay?
Yeah.
You're comfortable?
Yes.
Okay, be very comfortable, because the next thing that's going to happen is that this girl, good girl Jano, is going to give us a quotable quote. She's very good with reading up quotable quotes. Okay. She'll give us a couple of hints of the person who said this, and then she'll give us the quote. And, you know, using A squared plus B squared, solve the equation.
Because he's a numbers guy, we're like, listen, just take this like an equation. So a hint that I used previously for this person is that they come from a country whose current president is kind of being hailed as a very progressive Pan-Africanist president. Think of the inauguration for the Ghanaian president earlier. And how he was revered, how a lot of people were saying that is our hero. Do you remember somebody being talked about widely like that in Ghana recently? Young leader, he was armed with a lot of men around him. So think about that country. That's where we are on the map. And then this is the quote. He who feeds you controls you. He who feeds you controls you. Who said that? The person who said it is a president of this country, which has recently come back on the map.
It's a former president.
It's a former president. Think of the 80s. I like to start with the country, but yeah.
Can you guess the country?
I'd say West African.
All right.
We're getting warm.
This president was in Ghana during the inauguration of Mahama as president.
Okay.
And he was the showstopper. He was a visiting president in Accra, but everybody in Accra was behaving like he's the one who's being
the president.
You saw that? You saw those pictures?
Yeah. Small West African country. Does he like to wear military attire?
Yes.
Yeah.
I know.
A squared.
Now his name escapes me.
The country?
The country is...
It has two names. It has two words.
Burkina Faso?
Yes.
Perfect.
Plus B squared.
C squared.
So,
is equals?
Yeah, so
a former president of Burkina Faso.
Former president of Burkina Faso. Yeah, what's a good hint? We talked about a hotel in Nairobi, in Westlands. Somewhere there.
Damn.
Starts with S.
Thomas.
Oh, Mr. Sankara.
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Sankara said that. He said that. He said that in the 80s. He feeds you, controls you. He was pushing back on the over-reliance on things like aid and advice, which has come back to bite us, as we can see in the country. So that's who said that.
Isn't it odd that military leaders are the ones who we're quoting here and talking about this morning? Yeah?
True, actually.
So this person that, you know, is being hailed as Pan-Africanist and all, got into office through a military power coup. And the other one was removed from office. Same.
Story for another day.
Story for another day. But thank you. I think you did very well in terms of connecting the...
Of doing the math.
Yeah, of doing the math.
Now we get into real math.
So you're a numbers guy, okay?
Yeah.
And we know, just looking at last year, where people started seeing money going out of their pockets. And they saw and they pointed out to the finance bill and budget. And they said, this is an issue. And you expect that this year people are still going to be very, very active on this thing called the finance bill. In fact, when we hosted the CS for the National Treasury here on the first day of this show, one of the questions that Mariam asked, are we going to have a finance bill this year?
Is it a must? You know?
Must we have a finance bill this year?
Every year, yeah.
Now we're in that process where, again, our parliament is completely getting involved in the budget making process. So please educate us today. There's something that was taken to parliament and the speaker had said the deadline for that was the 15th of February, called the budget policy statement. What is that? Why is it important?
Thank you, and thank you for having me. I think the best place to start the conversation is probably a reflection. Because around this time last year, almost exactly a year ago, almost to the day, a similar thing happened where a document called the Budget Policy Statement was tabled in the National Assembly by the National Treasury. And think of the National Treasury as the brain behind the management of public resources in Kenya, so how it's collected and spent. And of course, National Assembly is, members of Parliament and the people who represent us. And so this document generally, in summary, and we'll talk more about it, gives an overview of, it's a statement of the government's intent in terms of policy and how it wants to allocate our resources. And we noticed last year two interesting things. One is that there was this big bullet debt payment that we had to make, right? Which I think we all came to know as the Eurobond. And a bullet payment is basically when your lender tells you, I need my money and I need all of it now, right? Or by a certain date. And the second thing that we noticed is that there was a very high gap in terms of what the government was hoping to collect in tax revenue. So imagine that somebody owes you 30,000 shillings, but you know that their income, even if they push very hard, is 26,000. But they've told you, in a legal document that we're going to actually collect 30,000 and be able to pay you back. And so for us, we struggle with these two things, and we're thinking, if this is such a firm statement of intent, what does it mean for the coming month? Of course, one of the documents that comes after the budget policy statement is the finance bill. And the finance bill, of course, contains these revenue-raising measures for government. So typically, it's what the government would use to fill that gap. And so, that together with the fact that we have this program with the International Monetary Fund, or the IMF, that has certain requirements of the way we manage our public resources, including taxes, made us think that something big is coming. And so we collected, as Bajeti Hub, we met with some of our partners. We had public forums on Zoom, what we call budget cafes, and we said that this is what we think is going to happen. And if it happens the way we think it's going to happen, things are going to hit the fan. And surely enough, 2 months later, Parliament was occupied, right? And I think it's almost impossible to understate the magnitude of that event for our democracy and also our public finance management. And the cool thing about today's conversation is we are back at February, where we were last year, exactly a year ago. And so we have the opportunity to actually anticipate what's going to come in terms of its implications on our life and how the government manages to manage public resources. So that's where we are. But it's important to understand that the finance bill of 2024 did not start in May. The decision that preceded the finance bill started actually, one, in 2014 when we first took the Eurobond, again, which is a decision that was included in the budget policy statement in February of 2014, but also more closely in August of 30th of 2023, where the National Treasury began the budget cycle. So they issued a circular, basically a document to all ministries, departments, and agencies, saying that this is how we are going to make the budget for this year, the key dates, etc. So the importance of today's conversation is being able to anticipate what is it that's coming, for example, around the finance bill of 2025, but also an appreciation that the budget policy statement and the finance bill are just two pieces of a 2.5-year process we call the budget cycle. And this process has mainly 4 stages. There's the formulation, where we make the budget, right? Where we identify our priorities, what's our wish list for the year. Then we have the budget approval, where we present this budget, both the spending side and the income or the revenue side, to Parliament or the National Assembly and Senate. And then this is approved. Then we have implementation, which is the 3rd stage, which is where now money starts to be spent by ministries, departments, and agencies, and services are starting to be delivered or continuously being delivered. Then the final stage is the audit stage, where the Office of the Auditor General comes in and says, okay, this is how we hope to spend our budget. This is how actually we spent it. So what's the value for money for citizens? And also what's the adherence to best practice and to law? And so where we are today is the budget policy statement, which falls smack in the middle of budget formulation. And the opportunity that we have now is to engage in that and give our views on what we think the National Assembly should consider.
So what is BPS?
The budget policy statement, again, it's a statement, but it's a document that's supposed to outline the broad strategic priorities and goals for government. But for citizens, what we really care about is the services that we think that the budget policy statement says that we're going to receive, right? So one of the key questions that we should be asking the budget policy statement, or when we read this document, is what does it say about the services or the priorities that we have versus what I care about, right? So if I care about free primary education, is that reflected in the budget policy statement? Now, of course, the budget policy statement or the BPS, we're talking about kind of broad and kind of high level. So we're talking about the allocation to Kenya's sectors. So there are about 10 sectors. So education, health, social protection, environment, and water and protection and natural resources, and agriculture sector as well, for example. So at this point, we're trying to see, of this 100 shillings that we hope to spend this year, how much of it is going to health, how much of it is going to education. And if we're saying that this year, health is expected to receive a lot more, which it is, about 73 billion more, almost near a doubling of its budget.
Where is that coming from?
Where is that coming from, and where is it going? Right? Is this going towards SHA, to the payment of clinical officers, like the conversation we were having previously? Is this going towards some of the referral hospitals? In education, is it going towards the payment of bursaries and things of the like? So this is a really important opportunity for us to engage and understand what is going to come in the next 16 months.
Off the bat, your red and green flags from the budget policy statement. Start with green, yeah. Let's be positive. Let's start with green.
So the green flag is that it seems like a lot of the troubles and a lot of some of the worries that we're having last year around, like you mentioned, the cost of living, around the exchange rate, around also something around public debt management, which you can talk more about. It seems like a lot of that is kind of calming. So we have the stabilization of the dollar a bit relatively. We have the recovery of some of the industries. We have a slight revenue collection is kind of a bit all over the place, but we have a slight improvement. We are seeing that, for example, what I just mentioned in terms of the health sector getting a really good a bump in resources. And of course, given that the Social Health Insurance Fund, the Digital Health Act, and all of these different regulations came into power, there needed to be resources to back those. So I think that's a positive thing. One also positive thing that I'd like to highlight is the feedback given on public participation so far in the budget policy statement. There's a whole annex of 7 to 8 pages of basically this is what citizens said around the budget policy statement when the National Treasury first published it, and this is the response. And you can actually see this has been incorporated, this has not been incorporated. So that's something definitely positive. Red flags, of course, are some of the big picture issues. So, for example, public debt management. There's still a significant share of resources that are supposed to go towards public debt management. I think for context, public debt is the accumulation of borrowing that we do each year. And the reason we need to borrow is because, let's say we expect to spend 100 shillings, but we only expect to collect 80 shillings in revenue. So there's a gap. And we need roads, we need continuous delivery of healthcare services, schools need to continue to graduate children. So we decide to borrow, right? And that borrowing over time annually leads to this accumulation of outstanding obligations for government. And to pay those, the government needs to take a share of revenue every time revenue hits the account in order to pay that. Now, unfortunately, the way our laws are structured, public debt is a first charge. So it means that when money hits government bank account, like the first priority is you pay our debts, we don't default, then we pay our services. So that's one of the big issues, of course, that's still cropping up. It's improved a bit because we don't have a big bullet payment this year. But that's another issue, of course, issue of pending bills and the impact of that on the economy. And of course, the reform that we see around state corporations, which will actually hold the bulk of the pending bills. Of course, we've also seen the reforms, again, a bit of a green flag, some of the reforms around the settlement of pending bills, so money being put aside, but also some of the reforms around expenditure. So this are cash versus accrual accounting, zero-based budgeting, which we struggle to see a bit in the document, but it's a good statement, again.
For laymen, what's zero-based budgeting? So
zero-based budgeting is basically, so you might think of your personal budget. When making your personal budget each month, you consider what your expenditure last month. Right. So last month I spent around 5,000 on when I went to the hospital, or 5,000 or 50,000 on education. So you're like, okay, the next month I need to also budget that amount, right? It's intuitive. But you might find that with zero-based budgeting, it's basically starting from fresh each month. So as opposed to saying, oh, I spent 5,000 on healthcare, this month I'll also spend another 5,000. You're starting and you're saying, actually, let's reprioritize. Let's start from zero, so zero-based. So let's start from scratch and then decide what our priorities are, and then we allocate based on that. Because what we have now is what's called incremental budgeting. So we say that last year we had 300 shillings for education. Let's not go back beyond that, below that. So let's push to 350, right? And then the next year we push to 400. But of course the trouble with that is that you may end up continuously funding things that aren't actually delivering services effectively.
Which is something that has been. So did you just say we're still somewhere in the wish list area?
Yeah.
In the cycle?
Yes, so we're in the budget formulations part.
All right. So somebody watching this is aggrieved and already pre-triggered just by the...
It's you can say
it's fed up with the nation. So what does it look like for somebody who's watching this and either wants to, clamor or counter-argue or participate or think or budget? What does it look like for somebody watching who just wants to understand how this affects me and what I can do now to integrate myself in this process?
So you can do two main things. One is to go to the National Treasury website, treasury.go.ke, and go to the budget section of that website, and you'll be able to find the budget, a tab called Budget Policy Statement. Or you can even Google Budget Policy Statement 2025. And that's the document. So it's about, I think the copy that was tabled in National Assembly is about 178 pages. So you don't have to read 178 pages. You can look for the specific sections in the table of content that you're interested in. So if you're a person who's passionate about healthcare, you can go to the section that has sector priorities, and you'll be able to click there and be able to see this is what the government is hoping to achieve in healthcare. Then, of course, you can go to the section that has what we call sector ceilings or sector allocations, and you're able to see how much is supposed to go to healthcare, or how much went to healthcare last year, and how much will go this year. And like we were mentioning, what are the specific programs that's going to? So, for example, majority of the increase we're seeing is going to general administration. Right?
What's that?
So there are a number of sub-programs within that, but one of them, which probably would explain the increase, is the primary healthcare fund, which is what the social health insurance is supposed to use to purchase services from primary healthcare facilities. And it's under a sub-program called Social Protection in Health. And that's also where the allocations for Linda Mama, the indigents through SHA are supposed to sit as well. So one is to understand the document. So decide what it is that you care about, and go into the document and understand it. And then the next step is, maybe it's the second step out of three. It's quite simple. It's basically to get a document or a Word document or Google Docs and write down the things that you're concerned about. It could even be the questions, right? You could say, what do we mean by prioritizing universal healthcare, right? Or why is the health sector getting this increase in this specific program? It could also be asking questions, very basic questions like, what is the role of budget policy statement in the budget cycle? Because these questions are supposed to go to National Assembly, and the clerks at National Assembly are also supposed to process this. So once you've done that, it could be a page, it could be 10 pages, it could be 50 pages, right? Of course, I think with the finance bill of 2023 and 2024, we saw very long.
People are writing.
Thousands of memorandums, right? And that's called a memorandum, that document. So it's nothing complex. And then the National Assembly had put out a notice basically showing us where we can submit that. So there's an email that if you go to either our Twitter actually, so Bajeti Hub, Bajeti_Hub, you'll be able to see the notice. Because it's normally published in the newspaper. But if you're able to go there, you'll see the notice, or Zalendo Watch is one of our great partners who captures what's going on in Parliament very effectively. If you go on Twitter, you'll be able to see that email that it's supposed to go to, which is the Budget and Appropriations Committee. And essentially, it's just sending that document to that email. Now, typically, public participation can also be physical. So you'll find that there'll also be maybe the National Assembly, hopefully, we expect that they'll open up for physical submissions. So basically you go to a town hall, you present your, a public space, you present your views, and then you're able to take back. But we do have kind of a criticism there, and I think it's important to mention that putting notices in the newspaper is not as effective in soliciting public participation as it could be. I think the latest report from the Communications Authority of Kenya is that only around 18% of Kenyans actually read the newspaper. Right. So that leaves over 80% of Kenyans out of that, even just the awareness that something is happening. Right. Then even moving to submission of memorandums, approximately between 7 and 10% of Kenyans use laptops or have laptops, own laptops or computers. So if you're saying that we need to solicit the views from 50 plus million Kenyans through digital means or through the sending of an email, then you're leaving out actually 90% of Kenyans. So it's important to also raise those issues, even in your memorandums as well. Very true.
I think there's something I saw last year when the impeachment of Rigathi Gachagua was happening. When they say if they wanted to, they would. I've never seen public participation solicited at that level. And I was like, okay, every other thing we've been doing has been a joke of public participation. This is, you could do it right. So to your point, it's something we should definitely have a discussion around. And even then, when it was newspapers and barazas, etc., there's still people who are being left out of the loop. So then for something as important as our budgeting, how do we make sure everybody is in the fold? or as many people as possible?
Yeah.
Like, what's a good percentage? I don't know. We'll talk about all of that.
And I think it begins like what Cuba Houghton has said. It begins with all of us, first of all, getting informed and participating, and which is what we are laying the foundation for that here today, by saying that the budget policy statement is out there. It's an overall indicator of what the government wants to prioritize spending for in the next financial year. It's available on which website again?
treasury.go.ke.
Yeah. And so if you go there, you should read and go to the specific areas that you want to, whether it's education, whether it's health, whether it's whatever. And then if you have areas of concern, you note them and you compile them into a memorandum and then you submit. Now the question would be, and then what? I mean, I submit all these things. How do I make sure that, my views are considered? Even just my views are read. Let's talk about that when we come back. Our guest is Cuba Houghton. He is from Bajeti Hub, and Bajeti Hub will tell us what they do. They are really good at just crunching the numbers and breaking down complex manenos into simple, understandable, bite-sized information, which is what he's helping us do this morning. We are talking about the budget outlook for 2025-2026. The process is in Parliament. It's going on. What are the implications for you, and why should you be concerned from this point, so that by come June, you're already in control of this vehicle? Sawa. We are taking a break. We'll be back shortly on Nation FM and TV and online. Conversation is around the budget and just seeking to understand where we are at right now in the budget making process, how we can participate, how we can engage, and that's why we have Cuba Houghton from Bajeti Hub. He's told us, well, one of the things that you can do is start consuming this information. If you go to the National Treasury's website, then you look for the budget policy statement for 2025-2026. See how much of it you can read and understand. And if you can't understand, then you can get somebody to explain it to you. And then raise areas of concern. Present those as a memorandum to Parliament. Step 3?
Yeah, follow up.
Follow up.
Yeah.
Follow up with Parliament. I really wouldn't know how to do that.
Yeah.
How do I follow up?
So sometimes there are opportunities for physical engagements where you can actually speak to what you submitted. But part of it also has to do with engaging consistently. So it doesn't stop at the budget policy statement. So regardless of what is approved by Parliament by February 28th in terms of the budget policy statement, there's still other opportunities available that, so the way budget documents work is they're interrelated. So the things that we approve in the budget policy statement should give us an idea of things that we should expect in the finance bill, the things that we should expect in the budget estimates, which is a document, or program-based budget, which is a document that has more fine details on what money is going to be spent on. So within healthcare, what are the specific budget lines? And it's at that point where we can actually follow up on what is submitted in the budget policy statement. And typically around then, we also have more physical engagements, which are also nice. But that's also, a way of following up. And also, one of the things we're realizing, you don't have to wait for opportunities where the National Assembly says submit your views, for you to submit your views. Now that you have the email, now that maybe your member of Parliament, it's actually to follow up directly and say that I submitted on this. Is there a way that we have actually acted on it? Because that's part of public accountability. It's checking whether our priorities, as reflected in what we've submitted, is actually entering the budget. And I think that's the point that we left before the break.
Right, and we were thinking about whether or not this makes any difference, whether anyone or anything is swayed by it. What's that possibility of an outcome actually integrating where people are coming from and what their priorities are?
So I think the first answer is Finance Bill 2024, but with the rejection. But I think a big part of that is acknowledging that one, that it's important to be consistent in engaging, but also that it's one of the things we've observed in the budget space, because we've been engaging this space for 10 years. So Bajeti Hub focuses a lot on public finance and these public budgets. And we've been following these documents, since 2014 onwards, where we had, our constitution and the implementation of devolution and as well. It's a long game. So there's some of the things that we were talking about or that people have been raising and citizens have been raising back in 2015 that are only being addressed now. Something like zero-based budgeting, or something like, which we've seen before in policy proposals and budget policy statements in the past. We've also seen issues of the cash versus accrual accounting, which is basically the method of accounting for government on how money is spent. and also things like the single treasury account. These are conversations that have been happening for a long time. But it's through that consistent engagement over time that the government typically is able to see that, oh, this is actually like a consistent priority. It's not just a wish list, like we were mentioning. So part of it is that budgets are slow creatures, right? They're 2.5 years for a full budget cycle. And it's important that we consistently engage in those processes so that we're able to follow up, yes, and so that in following up, we're able to say that these are things we've been raising for the past 3 years. And especially at the point now where the state feels a bit, whether it's authentic or not, but a bit more open to our public input, right? The fact that the CS can come on a show like this, the fact that CS can show up in Jivanji, right? To present his case and to, I guess, to accept questions as well, is an indication that there's more openness for us to actually inject these ideas.
In your opinion, what are the non-punitive ways we can fund the growing budget? We still have a fairly, a substantial increase in, this year's budget expectation. We've seen Kerry miss targets time and time again, right? The excessive taxation was the reason people went to the streets. But yeah, how do we fund our needs? We still have, debt to pay, debt to service. We still have recurrent expenditure. We still have development all of that. Yeah. Are there non-punitive ways to get to somewhere where, we can fund our budget without having to go into too much debt, and of course, do it in a way that's not punitive to Kenyans? Yeah,
that's an excellent question, because there's two ways to kind of look at it. One is you reduce the size of your budget or you increase the size of your income, right? There's no two ways about it. And I think that's also the space that the National Treasury and government is coming from, where it's like, there's no magic in this, right? Unless Kenya was to discover oil reserves or gold reserves, that could actually contribute to that. So one, of course, is reducing expenditure, and particularly the efficiency of which we spend, right? So is there a way we can reduce, one of the points you made on the break is there a way we can reduce corruption? Is there a way we can reduce the wastage of funds, right? And not even, part of it could be, reducing travel, which we saw a lot of Kenyans get passionate about, but part of it could actually be changing the way that we deliver services so it's a bit more efficient. And that's something that zero-based budgeting is supposed to affect. So there's kind of limiting it on the upper end. And then on the lower end, so there's 4 main tools or sources of finance for government. There's public debt, which is when we borrow. There's tax revenue, which is when we collect taxes, income tax, value-added tax, corporate income tax, among others. And then, of course, there's official development aid, so the USAIDs of the world, and then public and private partnerships. So, these are kind of the main 4 options that we have, and you can only push certain options so far. So tax revenue, Kenyans only have so much income. Right. And our income, if you look at the real income, so income adjusted for inflation, has not been growing significantly, right? And I think a lot of us feel that, right? The cost of living has been going up, but our incomes are not rising in proportion. So there's only so much you can tax. But, which is one of the things we saw late last year with the 7 tax laws that were introduced, is tinkering with the tax system in order to make it a bit easier for people to pay, something like ETIMS maybe, or tinkering maybe with the tax ban, so the people who can pay more, like have a bigger salary, maybe pay more, and people who have a smaller salary pay less. So those are some of the ways that you can make the tax system more efficient. When it comes to public debt, one option, of course, is to diversify and to try and access low, let's say, lower costing debt.
Cheaper debt.
So typically we call that concessional finance, or finance that has very low interest rates. So things from the World Bank and the like. But the issue with that is, of course, as Kenya becomes a bigger player in the region, we look less poor. Right. So we are given less cheap money. And also, of course,
first world problem,
and part of it is, of course, also with public-private partnerships. It's a way to leverage the financial strength and technical strength of this private sector, but which is good, right? And we've seen a lot of that, especially in electricity, in the electricity sector. But of course, the cost of that is that the more private sector involvement that's driven primarily by profits, the higher the cost of services or public services could be, right? So you consider maybe the power purchasing agreements that we have, right? Etc. So, and then of course, official development aid, again, as we go bigger, we've seen what's happened with the USAID as well. So countries are less willing to give us money. So there's no magic, but there's ways that we can try and be more efficient and more intentional about how we finance our budgets. So, for example, we may question whether it was a good idea to take another Eurobond last year, right? Or even the Eurobonds we took between 2014 and I think 2021. I think they're like 7
What did
of
we
them.
do with that money? Okay, that's another.
Where can you find the accountability?
Exactly.
Where can you find that breakdown? Because a lot of it is wastage.
Yeah.
7.
And that's actually information on the Treasury website as well. 7+.
Cuba,
Yeah, I'm stressed.
traditionally, people, I think globally, but let's just talk about people in Kenya. They look at these public finance issues and it's just complex. We move on. We focus on the days when the budget used to come and the finance minister is basically putting in price controls. Kwanzia leo, bei ya mkate imeshuka na shilingi 2, bei ya pombe imepanda na shilingi 3. That's what you care about. Now the rest, people never got to understand. Now we don't have price controls. The minister comes and says, taxes are going up, taxes are going down. But in terms of citizen engagement on matters of budget and public finance, they've been low. Until last year, when young people such as yourself started coming up. But then, you are in a class that is a bit different because you are completely interested and engaged with it. Would you say that you have seen a rise in interest of matters of public finance in the country?
Oh, yes. And not even
How
just
so?
from citizens, but I think, for example, also from the media. Like I was reading the front of the Business Daily. I think almost half of the stories there about public finance, issues of interest rates, issues of things to do with public debt.
Yes.
But I think for citizens, we are starting, especially young people as well, we're starting to connect the actions of government, for example, in how they raise revenues or taxes on our lives, right? So I'm able to link, okay, the government is saying that this new social health insurance thing, the SHIF thing.
We call it so many things.
Yeah, so many Taifa care, apparently. So the government is saying that there's this, new system of doing this. But how is it that that's going to improve the problems from the past, right? How is it, where are we going to get the money to fund this new thing? I think that's a question a lot of people were asking. And also, for example, even last year we had the benefit of having such a important thing to do with the debt at the same time as taxes. So again, the Eurobond and then now the finance bill. So people are able to relate that, so that when Kenya has big debts, at least I know that when I hear Kenya has big debts, it means that the government is going to tax me more, right? And it's something we've seen, kind of slowly pick up since, we started engaging the work in 2014. And now especially there's, also more engagement in the counties because all 47 county governments also have their own budgets, right? That also have their own processes. So, for example, the equivalent of the BPS or the budget policy statement at the county level is called the county fiscal strategy paper. So we've seen that a lot more, both civil society and just interested members of public are able to connect the decisions around public resources to the things that actually affect them, right? And to be honest, to some extent, budgets become a matter of life and death. And if you're wondering why, it's a matter of whether when you fall sick, you go to the hospital. Are you able to actually access care? Is the government able to actually take care of you? Despite money being collected for that very purpose on our pay slips, right? For SHA, for example, it's the same reason why when I go to, or when you have your kid in primary, when you go to university, your parents still have to fork up something to pay, even though the government is paying, publicly funding that university and even giving you a bursary, but still you have to pay, right? So it's again, it's not possible to understate now the central place that budgets play. And I think one of the reasons why it has risen so far is because there's just such a tight space for government to deliver services and pay back debt. And now citizens are starting to feel the brunt of that.
I want to hang on to that debt bit because the debt burden feels a little bit heavier every year. And there's a worry that, every subsequent generation is just having, higher debt burden on them as a result. And people are like, okay, at what point do we figure out, at what point do we rationalize our borrowing? And do we, either pull back or completely halt, something of the sort? How precarious a situation are we in as far as our debt situation is? And what does that mean for subsequent generations? So will every subsequent finance bill just need to have, collect more, but not for development spending, for debt repayment? Yeah,
excellent question. I think that is one of the things we're really passionate about at Bajeti Hub. And actually, if you're interested in public debt, there's a whole other document called the medium-term debt strategy that's submitted alongside the budget policy statement. You find it at the same place, the National Treasury website, that outlines how the government is going to deal with public debt over the next 2 to 3 years and the coming year. But so understanding that public debt is created through the gap between revenue and spending. What you have to do over time, and one of the only ways you can kind of fix the situation, apart from trying to diversify and tinker with those things, is reduce that gap over time. Because it reduces the accumulation of debt. And in fact, from a technical perspective, as long as the interest on the interest rate on public debt is higher than your GDP growth, so the rate at which your economy is growing, which determines how much tax revenue you're going to collect, then you will never leave the debt cycle or the debt crisis. So the trick, and the government, you'll see even in the budget policy statement, is to reduce that gap, right? And I think even for us in our daily lives, if you want to get out of debt, you have to pay more towards debt and you have to borrow less, right, over time. Because you may need to continue borrowing in order to live, but it's about managing that debt in a way that is not repeating the mistakes of the past, right, going forward.
How bad of a situation is it? Yeah, that's kind of what I want to know.
Out of every 100 shillings we collect in ordinary revenues, that's a tax revenue we collect from income tax, value-added tax. Out of every 100 shillings, for the past 3 years, we've been spending between 60 and 70 on public debt, which leaves 30 to 40 shillings for the delivery of all the other services. That's funds to go towards independent institutions like Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, the Auditor General. That's funds that goes towards the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Lands. So what happens when you have that 30 to 40 shillings? What do? You borrow more because you need to deliver 100 shillings worth of value. Yeah, right.
It's a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
And I think a big concern as well in all this is that's in goodwill. If you're doing 70 shillings for debt, or 60 and then 30, 40s for service delivery, and then that also isn't used for service delivery because of things around corruption, wastage. Exactly. I know that there's places where people can see evidence. Is there evidence of wastage? I keep calling it wastage because I think it is government wastage, yet there's a way that they can reconcile that to use it the way it's supposed to be used, to either pay back debt or even it out. Where is that room for accountability to look and see and kind of counter and then begin to push for a reduction on wastage?
Excellent. And that has to do, or the place where you can get that information is the Office of the Auditor General's website. So you can literally Google Auditor General Kenya, and you'll get the website. And it has to do with the final stage of the budget cycle that we talked about, the audit stage. Because that's essentially where the Auditor General looks at all these ministries, departments, and agencies, even some specific projects, and starts to say, okay, do we actually have value for money? Can this money that was allocated be accounted for? Right? That's where we see all of the worries about the thousands of bank accounts, the assessments of whether money was actually used lawfully, for example, or whether there's a trace of money. So this money hit the account, where did it go towards the delivery of services? And so a very big part of that, and I think the media has picked up on this very well, is to go to the Auditor General website and look at the different audit reports, including on public debt. Right? We have specialized report on specific issues. So that's a great place where you can go and get any ammunition you need for accountability, because those reports are supposed to be presented to Parliament, and the Public Accounts and Public Investment Committee are actually supposed to consider those, or public accounts mostly, and implement the recommendations from the Auditor General into the next budget cycle, right?
So if you bring in the same issues, that the two women holding us together are the Controller of Budget and the Auditor General, Margaret Makango and Nancy Gathungu. Thank you so much.
You're just holding us a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. On the issue of the debt, there has been this push from the public on give us a proper audit of our debt. How much we borrowed, when did we borrow, whom did we borrow from, at what cost, and where did we take the money? Now, there was an attempt by the president to establish a task force to audit public debt. And the LSK said, Unikazi, Auditor General, Sisi Pantaka. When the CS for the National Treasury was here, he said, actually, the Auditor General is working on that, and he said, by the end of March, we'll have a report. Okay. Have you heard anything like that? I mean, you work in those circles.
So we heard that there's a report underway. There's an audit underway, especially after the abandonment of that attempt. Yeah. We know that the National Treasury and the Auditor General are working on something, and how we also know that funny enough, that the Auditor General has been doing public debt audits, not maybe a forensic audit, but audits, is that somewhere in July, I think July, August, after this whole, the finance bill discussion, around, I think, 8 debt audit reports showed up on the Auditor General's website under the public debt special audits. So we know that has been going on. But of course, it was a transparency issue of why are those reports not available. So I think we are aware that that's going on, and we're also seeing better efforts by National Treasury to give information on public debt. And so that's something I think we're definitely looking forward to.
Will it make a difference, in your opinion? So let's say end of next week, the Auditor General says, forget much, here's the report. Here is the debt audit. Will it make a difference?
I think it will allow us to see what not to do. We'll be able to see, okay, this is what was done over the past maybe 10, 15 years. This is what the government is doing now. Do they align? We are seeing that over the past 10 years, let's say at least, there's been, frankly, bad debt decisions, right, that are coming to bite us now. So if we look through that audit report and we're able to see, we are making the same decisions around that along that line. And we're able to see that, no, this is not, we have actually evidence to make our demands that this is not what we want, because we do not want to end up in that situation. So I think that's the value that the audit brings, apart from, allowing us to kind of have a bit of a therapy session and be validated in our claims.
But can there be accountability? Can we take people to court? Can you say that you borrowed this money, you misappropriated or mismanaged this money, so ndani?
You know what's awesome? That recently happened in Mozambique. So in something that's known as a tuna bond scandal, similar to a Eurobond, they basically said we are going to raise money so we can build this big, fishing operation for tuna. And I think out of the $2 billion, something like, I think 1 million made it back to the country, and that was in kickbacks. Wow. But what happened is that I think last year, the CS at that time was actually arrested and charged. So maybe I guess we wouldn't put it beyond Kenyans, and I think we have a long history of public interest litigation that can be taken advantage of. But I think the bigger emphasis is on how is it that we avoid the situation again. Yeah.
Okay. So in conclusion, Cuba, in one word, if you're to speak to young and old citizens of this country right now, ahead of June, what would you have us do?
So you may be tempted to accept that some of the issues that you see around you and the problems you see in Kenya, so issues like inequality, issues of poverty, issues of access to adequate healthcare or free primary education, for example, you may be tempted to accept them as the reality of what it is, that we just have a broken nation. But one of the opportunities that you do have over the next 6 months is actually to fix your nation and to do your part in actually imagining and presenting your ideas on what you think the nation can actually look like for you and for your children.
Thank you.
Please shake his hand. Please.
The handshakes that we accept.
These are the ones we accept.
These are the handshakes.
Cuba Houghton is from Bajeti Hub. He is a policy leader. He understands the matters of budget, and he's been here today just bringing us to focus on the budget making process so we don't get to June and our pressures are high. Let's start managing them now by making sure that we are engaged in the process, and we should do that. Okay, thank you very much, Cuba, for doing this, and we'll welcome you again and again ahead of June and even after June. Keep it there for more conversations. We are fixing the nation one conversation at a time. In the next hour is where Janet...
We're giggling like it's an inside joke. Miss me with that.
Miss me with that.
And today, Janet has some peeve and she'd like to raise it. Don't go away.